This is the live weekly update. And today I am going to be updating on the past week, which has really centered on topics of power. Thanks for joining. Um, Today I'm like a little bit loose with my thoughts. I don't have much organized, but it's been mostly like a massive week. That's kind of the thing. So I don't know where this is gonna go. I don't know what we're gonna do, but, I can say that since the last live, I feel like so much has happened in my life, the interiority of my life in my mind, and, I think that might be why I'm, like, a little bit stunned, I guess. Like, I feel like I need to take a moment and, like, collect myself after all of that. So, to keep it easy today, I think I'll just start with talking about power and note the ways that it showed up conceptually over the week and see what happens after that and what flows from that share. Um, so, first of all, I will say that I've had a million conversations with a million people. It's just been such a robust, like, rich week of really lovely, beautiful exchanges and um I think that I'm sitting with a lot of gratitude for the support that I've gotten and the feedback that I've received from people who are just so encouraging and like following along with this process and being a part of it. It has been really nourishing to me. And also, I feel like just right now, it's like the end of November 2025, and this is the season where we kind of come to a close and like reflect on what's been happening. And this year has felt so massive for me. Um just it's been a like really expansive year. I've done a lot that I've never done before. I guess maybe that will be relevant when we start to talk about power. So I'm going to ground this conversation in the page that I developed for Liberation is Local. It was our 80th week of gathering for Liberation is Local, and following off of the previous weeks around like creativity and trusting the process and doing work behind the scenes. It just was kind of a natural lead in to talk about power. Also, the gadfly, which is my attempt at stand up philosophy. I call it the gadfly, by the way, because Socrates was named the gadfly, like called the gadfly during his like trials before the state executed him for corrupting the minds of the youth and getting people to think critically. But the gadfly is like that annoying insect that just like won't stop buzzing. And in this way, like the Socratic modeling of being a gadfly is really asking critical questions, sort of critiquing power in a way that raises some critical consciousness around the state and the status quo. So I thought it was clever to call my approach to stand up philosophy the gadfly, also because there's a relevant reference and metaphor that people can like kind of associate it with the moth, which is a very popular storytelling format podcast and like event space. So people can think about, well, I know the moth where people tell their stories, but this is not exactly that. It's more in the spirit of a gadfly. Anyway, wow, what a digression. All that was to say that the gadfly, the introduction of the gadfly as a space for me to practice and experiment with stand-up philosophy has uh like I guess ended its introductory season, its period, because we started that at a local pizza place in town with a 3-part series on knowledge, ethics, and power. So last Sunday, just a few days ago, was the power session, and that coincided with the Liberation is Local conversation on power, which happened in the morning on Sunday too. Sunday, big day of power. So it's kind of just been like the anchor for the week. That's why I'm going to talk about it. I would love to talk about stand up philosophy. I would love to talk about the things that I've learned through that. But first, in order to have any of that make sense, let's talk about power. This is the page for Liberation is Local that I created around power, um, mostly just to get some kind of language down. I think that there are natural sort of inclinations we have around power, We can feel it mostly when it's really uncomfortable in our lives, or maybe sometimes when we feel like we are very powerful and that feels like emboldening and we are like pushed or resourced enough to do something that we want to do. Like that's like the empowering stance. When we feel empowered or we feel powerful, that's like typically a positive kind of connotation for good reason. I think that puts us in place with, like, in touch with our agency and our choice and our freedom to like shape our lives. Kind of the ideal scenario when we're thinking about like being free human beings. But then, unfortunately, given our current conditions, so much of our experiences of power are actually also connected to senses of powerlessness or when we are lacking power. Or, on top of that, when others have power over us or systems are more powerful than we feel like we are to be able to influence and affect changes that would be preferable for our conditions or circumstances. So, there's this like gut feeling that people often have about power, and it comes up a lot, but like a real philosopher, I think it's helpful for us to have language and definitions that don't have to be exhaustive, but can at least give some common shape to the ideas or the experiences that we're having. I think this is like a critical aspect of why thinking, reflecting, sharing, producing, and connecting around the knowledge that we have is so powerful because it gives us like frameworks and tools for us to be able to make sense of our experiences in the world and therefore locate ourselves in it so that we can know where we have responsibility and opportunities to make change. If you didn't know, that's kind of like the whole reason why I do philosophy. For me, I always found that a certain way of approaching theory is actually wildly powerfully transformative precisely because it helps give us a sense of knowing where we are so what we can do about the things that we want to change. That's really my only interest in philosophy. I don't really like it as an intellectual exercise. To me, it's always grounded in the world. And therefore, maybe this makes sense why philosophy is kind of always like, or the pursuit of wisdom and knowledge could be the practice and the pursuit of some form of power. I was looking over here because I just got a little bit distracted with what I was saying, of course. And it reminded me of Michel Foucault's like very, very, very famous way of situating power and knowledge together, like as power slash knowledge. I think that I'm still looking for the book. It's not even in this room with me. It's across the hall. But anyway, Foucault is like really famous for making this association very explicit where power and knowledge go hand in hand together. And I think that there's a good reason why, like I just said, because the more that we can like understand and make meaning and make sense, um, make intelligible our world and our experiences, that is a way to locate us with our agency. One might also say that it's a way of sort of fashioning influence over our realities too, that by gaining knowledge, producing knowledge, and creating a sensibility for the world, we are also in a way making the reality and shaping our reality. So why not just start with like why philosophy is so helpful and important by grounding it directly as its own deep source of power and reflected as a, a terrain for power in terms of power struggles based on what we know. Oh my God, this is not where I thought I was going to go. Wow. Um, I might have to rein this in because otherwise I'm going to go so far off in a different direction about what we know and what we don't know and how that is a power struggle. And it's all political because politics is just about a matter of power relationships and how we navigate them or shape them or reiterate them or challenge them. Let's take a breath and get back to where we were going. Okay. So, on a different level, I think it's important for us to understand what we're talking about by having some kind of common language. And power is just one of many concepts that I think can get so convoluted because we say it, but we don't know what we mean when we say it. We might have, like I said in the beginning, that like gut feeling about what power is, and we can like we know it when we feel it, but that maybe isn't so empowering in order to be able to like cultivate some kind of, I don't know, momentum around what to do with them. So that's what I'm trying to do. Everything that I share about power is really just after years and years and years of like my own influences. Of course, I'm like taking in sources and the ideas and theories from many other people from many different places and traditions. And I'm always engaging with people like and in my own life myself in a way that like tries to distill how this shows up. So even though I might talk in a kind of abstract way, I'm looking for concrete examples that can show like how this is real and why it's relevant like in our everyday lives. So for that reason, I have tried to describe power in very basic ways that make it a little bit more explicit and concrete and don't just say like power is a force that shapes things. More importantly, I think for us to be able to locate ourselves in relationship to power, we need some language such as I always like to think of power as the ability to influence the conditions of our choices. I'm like a pretty explicit existentialist in the way that I think everything comes down to our agency and freedom, not in an individualist kind of way, but in a very interconnected sort of way. And the like lifeblood of existentialism is about choice and responsibility of our choices, that we have some volition and our will is at play here. So one might think that power is actually expressed just by the sheer act of choice. And yes, to a certain degree. I mean, like, this is like what I think Nietzsche was getting at when he was like, the life is the will to power. Like, the will to power is this kind of expression of the will. And in his terms, power is kind of always this like project of like growth or becoming stronger or healthier or more robust and like lively, if you will. Sure, I'm not going to go there right now. My point is that I think it's also helpful to think about power as it plays out in our everyday lives, not just about choices, but about the ability to influence the conditions of our choices. And that might just seem like semantics, but I do think that the difference is really important. So many times when we feel disempowered or oppressed or marginalized based on the oppressive structures that we live in, which I always say are just unjust power structures, um, then we can feel like we don't actually have a lot of good choices. That's like Bell Hooks describes the experience of oppression as the absence of choices, which is a limiting of our freedom. We don't have good options. So if we're not free, we can't really move. We don't have the will to direct our own lives and pursue our own projects. So, or the projects that we would pursue are like extremely limited, confined, and constricted. So all of this is actually like this narrowing of our field of possibilities because our choices are reduced so much of what is really a viable option for us that we can end up feeling kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. There's lots of other ways to say this. Catch 22, double bind. And that is sort of the experience, the feeling of oppression of like you don't have good options, you can't make good choices. So either way, like you're going to have to make a choice because that's the nature of existence. But the consequences or the path that that might put us on is not ideal, and it may not be what we really prefer or want to choose for ourselves. So when we think about power as beyond just the choices and instead the ability to influence the conditions of our choices, I think this is important because for me, it locates us in a place of like having influence and agency, even if we can't make the choice exactly yet now that we would want to. So the ability to influence the conditions of our choices to me is kind of like we know where we want to go. And so the conditions are what like make that seed possible to grow. Um it's not as like tenable to just say, I'm using the metaphor, I want a plant to grow. Okay, well, certain conditions need to be set before that can even be possible. To be less abstract, I might say that, like, I really want to, I'm going to do something like sweet and neutral here. I want to be able to make friends with people from other cultures so that I can, like, expand my worldview. If that's what I want, and that's the choice that I want to make to, like, become the kind of person who has friends who span many different cultures and experiences, then there are certain conditions that I'll need to cultivate in order to be able to actually realize that. Like, one, I might need to change the conditions of myself so that I can like speak different languages, start learning different languages. I might need to like get my passport renewed so that I could travel or start saving money so I could travel. I could start reaching out to people and building networks so that I actually have connections in other places. And then I can go and like visit them and not just be like a colonizer traveler. I'm not going to get into traveling. Not going to get into traveling right now. That is not going to be my soapbox today. But there are things that we can do to influence the conditions of our choices. Again, because you can't just say, you know what, I really want to have friends among people who are different from me. What are you going to do about that? Just like go run up to a person and like be friends with them? Maybe that could work. But like you sort of need to become the kind of person that people want to be friends with. You need to be situated in a place where you have the opportunity to do that. There's like so many other conditions we would have to make to do that. And all of those things, whether that's changing yourself, deepening your capacity and skill set, or acquiring the kind of resources and materials that would support an eventual choice to be able to like become that person or make that move. Those are all examples of how we can shape and influence the conditions of our choices. If all we do is create the conditions where we are like isolated and sequestered and ignorant and very uncomfortable or anxious and otherwise offensive to people, like we're not creating good conditions to like eventually have the choices that we can show up for each other very differently. That was kind of a spontaneous example. I hope that worked. Hi to everybody who's on the call. Thanks for being here. Um, okay, maybe there will be more to come up with that. Anyway, big shift. That's what I'm offering. A big shift to say, if we're trying to understand what power is, what it looks like, what it feels like, how that shows up in our everyday lives, let's think about it differently than some like abstract notion and instead consider it as the ability to influence the conditions of our choices. I kind of want to feel like, I kind of want to feel like, I kind of think that it'd be helpful to use some other examples. I'm thinking a lot about parent-child relationships right now, like in family dynamics. That's another case where we can see like who has power in that relationship. Let me just be clear that like power doesn't have to be equal. I think it's totally okay for some people to have more power than others. How that plays out is really where the normative judgments of what's like appropriate or not or good or bad is where this like, shakes out. So, for instance, children, we could say, have less power in a family dynamic than the adults or the caregivers who are responsible for them. And that seems in many ways appropriate as long as that power is leveraged in a way that's like healthy, supportive, nurturing, and caring and is in the best interest of everybody. Where things go awry, obviously, is when people like adults or parents or caregivers with power over children really abuse that power and therefore create abusive or traumatizing and violent hostile conditions where the children do not have like children in those cases do not have the ability to influence the conditions of their choices because young people, small humans, are some of the most disempowered members of our society, the way that we set this up. It's terrible. So the ability to influence the conditions of our choices, I think, makes so much sense. You can think of like a parent has the ability to influence the conditions of a kid's choices. They could like put them in all sorts of scenarios or situations or limit or expand the conditions of a kid's choice. But the children in those dynamics often have much less, like significantly, severely less ability to influence the conditions of their choices because there's such an extreme difference in power represented in the relationship between a parent and a child. Okay. I'm going to jump to a different aspect of power, which is if you're on the page or want it, it's like here. This is the little note that I added, which is just to clarify that when we're talking about power, again, not as this like abstract thing that just exists around us. Power actually, I believe, shows up as a relational dynamic that is structured and reinforced by systems that we create. So, going back to the parent-child relationship in our culture, in the like a US American context, there are many systems that are actually created to further disempower kids and make them even more vulnerable. That's why things like violence and abuse can be so egregious for children. That's also true with like people with disabilities because there are systems that reinforce and create more like disempowering conditions for people who are already more vulnerable and marginalized. One could say this is kind of like across the board. That's how oppression works. It's reinforced by structures and systems. All that should indicate to us that we then, if we tap into a sense of power as the ability to influence the conditions of our choices, could then create structures and systems that actually help support healthier power dynamics or support conditions where people who are otherwise marginalized have more options and choices available to them. That might seem abstract, but like if you're in the work of doing policy stuff or in a position of power or in any way creating and building structures and systems, let me just say, I'm trying to make the point that like power doesn't have to be a bad thing. Structures and systems don't have to reinforce unjust power dynamics. Because it's a relational dynamic, we can create systems that actually support healthy power relationships that can still have unjust or like unequal power, but that doesn't have to be unjust power. Wow, 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 wow. So many words. Here's the second part of power that I actually often talk about. This one is I think about power as the means to produce intended outcomes, even in the face of opposition. Opposition can look like a lot of things. Opposition can look like those who have power over us. Opposition could look like structures and systems that are not designed to facilitate our end goals. Opposition could even be our internal constitution, like our emotional, psychological hangups that we have internalized that keep us from acting from a place of real power. So the opposition is key. I think that the power reveals itself as the means to produce intended outcomes, even in the face of opposition. I don't know. I'm feeling not like I wanna talk so much today. So, I don't really wanna give, like, a million examples, though I know that they're helpful. Um, but this shows up, I think, when we think about what is that gut sense that we have around power, we know it in the way of, like, we could say, "Oh, my boss or my manager has power," really in the situation of, like, wanting to propose a change to our work hours or something because they're the ones who are going to say, no, we can't go to a 32-hour work week. Absolutely not. Well, if there's power in the situation, we say, well, the intended outcome I have is that we all only work 32 hours a week. Then you might build power as increasing the means to produce intended outcomes, even in the face of the opposition of someone who says no. So the means to produce intended outcomes could look like a lot of things. It could be changing policy. It could be unionizing and organizing with others. It could be, I mean, I'm not suggesting this. It's a kind of an individualist approach, but even like the means to produce intended outcomes, we peace out, leave that job, go find a different one with an organization that supports a 32-hour work week. So, um, I hope that like some of these examples, there are truly examples anywhere you look. That's my challenge to everyone. If we're trying to understand power, my challenge is to see it, feel it, look for it, and notice how power is always ever present. But again, I think it's easier to do that when we have like a lens to be able to see power through. That's why I like to give the definitions of power as the ability to influence the conditions of our choices and the means to produce intended outcomes, even in the face of opposition. Noticing it's a relational dynamic and the systems and structures are often what reinforce or support how power moves. Okay, this is like such a definitional thing. This isn't even like, what did I do this week? I had such a beautiful, rich, deep, profound, emotional, connective, relation oriented, like really, really, really rich week. And all I'm giving you is this like spew of definitions. Maybe we'll wrap this up somehow. I don't know. Just know I was fully human this week and you're getting nothing but some dry conceptual frameworks. Okay. In the midst of all of this, when we're talking about power, I think that there's also that instinct of people saying like there's power over. That one we know. That can look like domination or oppression. It can look like control, coercion. It's usually experienced as a sense of like authority, like someone has the authority to shape something. But power over is often reinforced through practices of like punishment and consequences. So, a threat of violence or a threat of negative consequence. This is power over makes people feel insecure. That's why we are afraid to do things when others are exercising power over us. We know that the consequences of producing different outcomes might be challenging to like really take on. So let's just say it's not always like pretty. Sometimes power over is ugly and violent. And so it's scary to challenge that. Um, Power with is the ideal scenario, I think, that I was kind of even touching on when it's like, oh, you want to work a 32-hour work week? Well, build power with others. That is kind of like I think, gold standard for how to approach power in a non oppressive way. Power with is just a basic, simple equation. It's like we're more powerful together, like power in numbers, power of the collective. There's a strategy around collaborating, pooling resources, being organized with others so that in like a kind of mass, critical mass, or a collective space, we are actually safer to leverage our influence, and we can probably be more successful because we can create more effective means for producing our intended outcomes. Even the sheer fact of, or the sheer practice of connecting with others to build power with others is influencing the conditions of our choices. Are you getting this? It's like very meta. There's lots of layers to it. But if we organize ourselves with others, we are already using our power to build power, increase our power with others by creating the conditions where we are not alone in our choices. And therefore, we might feel stronger, safer, more strategic. We might even be more informed about the choices we can make because we are like nested within a collective or a group of people who can bring different perspectives. All of those are examples of how we can influence the conditions of our choices just by being with other people. Do you see what I mean? Like, power is everywhere. And if we really look at it from this lens of these definitions, I think we can really see how much we have access to power. And hopefully, it's not like a lovely pill to swallow, but maybe a necessary aspect of like actually being who we need to create the world we want to live in is coming to terms with all the ways that we relinquish our power and all of the ways that we kind of give it up because we are so oblivious to how much we actually have access to power ourselves and especially with others. Like, I am probably like such a deep optimist because I know that there's so much power. Yeah, power is everywhere. Um, but I think what something that I was trying to like kind of convey on Sunday at the Gadfly for stand up philosophy is like to approach this from a philosopher's perspective and more specifically to approach power from an epistemological perspective. I think that it is by design and for the purpose of maintaining unjust power dynamics of oppression that so many of us do not know what we mean when we say power, and even more do not recognize power in the flesh and blood of our lives, because if we did, then we would actually see how available power is to us, how much power we have, and how to build it. So I think there's this other thing of like a cognitive shift or a mental framework that we need to kind of like move beyond, breakthrough, is thinking of power as strictly this like zero sum game where some people have it and some people don't. That, no, mm-mm. I reject. I reject that. It is such a like very simplified, binary, limited way to think that in order to have power, we need to take it from the people who have it, as if like there's only so much and then we need to take that power away from them. I disagree because power is something that is like way more fluid and maybe even like generative. I don't know what to use for this. I'm thinking of like water, but we might say water is limited. Um but we can build power. That's the thing. Power isn't something that we just take or give or receive and shift and like it's like pawns on a chessboard. What it is something that we can actually build, we can generate, we can harness and create more of by the ways that we organize ourselves, by the systems and structures that we create. Now we can harness that power. So I think it's like maybe it's an energetic kind of thing that we need to be shifting to instead of something that we really boil down to an overly simplified way of like power is something that rests in the decisions of those who say yes or no to us, which is often the ways that we experience it, instead of understanding that power is everywhere. Like, again, maybe we need to read Nietzsche more. Life is the will to power means power is everywhere. Everything is the will to power. Or we need to be able to see in a Foucauldian kind of view that power is everything that shapes literally our material world too. So it's not an abstract energy, but it is that which forms the concrete structures, the material realities of our lives. Um, Now I'm really going on a rant here about power. Mostly again, because I just think once we have a better understanding of power, then we can use it differently. Then we can change our relationship to it and our relationship to ourselves and each other. So my point, to just like summarize it again, as an epistemologist and someone who is very, very keen on like the political consequences of an epistemology built on ignorance, where ignorance is produced, if we are ignorant about the nature of power, we will not be able to tap into it in such a way that we build it, share it, create power that then we can leverage to influence the conditions of our choices or produce the intended outcomes even in the face of opposition, when our project is one of like freedom and liberation and justice and life for everybody. Like, that to me is kind of like the summary of why I think power is so important. And obviously, if we have systems and structures that are maintaining unjust power dynamics and relationships right now, it would be in the interest of preserving an unjust status quo to keep people very ignorant and unaware of what power looks and feels like, thus disempowering people and separating us from our own agency, freedom, and will to exercise our power, build our power, and share it. That to me feels like the rant. Okay? Okay. There's something else going on here on the bottom of the page where I made the direct connection between power and freedom and responsibility. I don't know that I really want to get into that right now. Other than like, yeah, if you're free in the sense of like an existential freedom, then I think we do have some connection to power. But with, as Uncle Ben says in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. Um, I think I'm trying to think of where I'm going to go in this next week, but I've been thinking a lot about people who have power and in the current systems of unjust structures. If you have a lot of power, that often means you come with privilege or have access to privilege. And privilege, I think, is the consequences of injustice. It doesn't have to be unequal. Unequal doesn't necessarily mean privilege, but unjust, to me, is where we get privilege in our current systems. If that doesn't make sense, that's okay. I don't want to go into it right now. Anyway, all I'm trying to say is that if you have power and in an unjust structure, if you have privilege, then I believe you have an even stronger responsibility to use it in a way that balances out the power to make it more just. That might be very confusing. That was a lot of words. Anyway, I know that I could go on and on and on about power, and I kind of hope to at some point, but because I've already been talking about this for half an hour, I think maybe I should share a little bit more personally of what's going on here. I've been, like I said, like had like a really big week, and it's very rich. Several people who are on this call right now have poured into me in the past week with notes and texts and reflections and treats. So thank you for the support. It has meant so much to me in this week, especially because I think of where I'm at right now, of trying to think through what comes next. So when I started this update saying, it's the season of reflection, it's the end of the year of 2025. And for me in particular, like doing the third of the 3 in the series for the Gadfly on knowledge, ethics, and power. I hope that that's not the end of stand-up philosophy. Like, for sure, that's not what I want. That's not what I'm aiming for. But it was the end of this like 3-part, like first little dive into an experiment of what that could look like, since no one knows. And so I'm reflecting on how that went and what happened. And I can't think about the Gadfly without thinking about For the Love of Strangers, which is the other project I've been building this year. That's coming to an end in just a couple of weeks. Like, the finale is on December 12th. And even just those two things alone, we could throw in liberation is local as well, which, yeah, why not? Let's just put it all in here. I'm thinking about these three spaces. And I had some like really lovely conversations with some family members last night too, like separate conversations, but with friends, with loved ones, with family. And then in my own reflections, I'm like really astounded by this year. And if we want to put it in the context of power, of like influencing the conditions of our choices, I'm kind of stunned myself at like the fact that these spaces were made to do things in community. Like, um, say, I'm going to do stand up philosophy and then present it. And then people showed up. And I did not do any of this on my own. Like, let it be clear, because um, other people have the ability to influence the conditions of my choices by saying, yes, here's a physical space you can use to host this event. Or other people show up to make the conditions of my choices be like helpful. Like if I'm going to experiment and try a new thing, it's everybody else who shows up in that space that makes it a good experience, you know? Um, and then the means to produce the intended outcomes, even in the face of opposition. I I think, sitting right now with like a real grappling with myself, that some of the opposition that I face is that most people don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And so the means to produce the intended outcomes, even in the face of opposition, sometimes I'm not even saying it's like malicious, but the opposition is often, for me, trying to communicate something that does not make sense to people, that is like so unfamiliar. So I'm just sitting with like so much gratitude and kind of awe and appreciation for the fact that these spaces have existed, that I created them and people are engaging in them and others in community have made it possible. And I want to, I don't know, do something profound here or poignant and use it as like a microcosm of how creative we can be when we're really attuned to our power. Here's my optimist coming through again, that like I believe so much in radically different possibilities because I know we are creative and powerful enough to do that. Nothing about the current landscapes really indicates like the vast majority of our realities are pointing in a very different direction. But I am pretty stalwart in my belief that like we can do so much more, and it's so close because it's already like inherent in us as powerful beings to be able to create and produce entirely different conditions. I think that one of the most important places, I do want to say this, one of the most important places where I feel like we can immediately direct our power with intention is by influencing the conditions of our choices in terms of how we relate to each other and how we are in relationship with one another. If nothing else, I hope that this is something people can really like wrap their heart and minds around. We can change the conditions of our choices in terms of how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to others. And I know that like when the world is really uh hard to look at, or like there are harsh realities that are heartbreaking and discouraging and violent, we can jump to the fact that like yes, that means major structures and systems need to be overhauled and reformed. Not reformed, but like reformed. um but in order to do that, truly, even the big systems, like it's kind of like that plant having to have the seed, or like you want to just like make friends in a different culture, you got to set the conditions first. I believe so much that what we have to do is focus on creating the conditions for us to be able to be in relationship differently, for us to show up for ourselves and each other differently by choosing that. But like sometimes our conditions are like we have to become more self-aware, we have to become more accountable, um we have to be more informed, and then we need to be more humble, we need to have greater empathy, we need to practice a deeper well of compassion and critical thinking in order for us to have the choice even to relate to each other differently. Like meta. You get it? um, but that's something that I feel so passionately about, and I think is even something that has resonated so much with me about liberation is local. And I don't know, I also think I live a charmed life because I'm just surrounded by people who are gorgeous humans, who are thoughtful, heartfelt, generous, kind, and open in so many ways. And that alone is like changing the conditions of our choices. When we become those people and when we surround ourselves with those people, our choices suddenly are like so much more um magical even. Like, when you're like around people who like really help you feel like you can be fully yourself, that is a condition that opens up so many choices for even how you want to show up. And then be that person who creates the conditions for other people to have the choice to really share their best, their like most spirited and inspired pieces of themselves. Like, what an incredible gift we can give to each other. What a powerful political strategy we could be pursuing just by harnessing this understanding that power actually shows up in the ability to influence the conditions of our choices. And we could do that for each other. Okay. I think I'm like going on so many rants today. Um, I do want to. I'm going to end this a little bit earlier than I have, but I don't need to go on for another 75 minutes this week. So I think I'm just instead of going through everything that happened in the past 7 days with a full comprehensive update, I want to share one thing about this project. And I've kind of been saying it. I think I've been alluding to it. Um, But one major, like, epiphany that I had last week is hitting me hard in the heart because it's making me face my own biggest fears and, resistances, like, the things that I have rejected for a really long time. And just a little note about me over the past at least the past 10 years, but I'm sure longer than that, I have paid very close attention to the like turning points in my life or the things that I'm like, that's the one thing I don't want to do so badly. I don't want to do it. Where I have the strongest resistance, the greatest rejection. And I go like, I know for me, it's like, I don't want to do that. And I never wanted to have to do it alone. And so I really have like walls up around pursuing that. Well, I confronted something like that this week in myself that I think is calling me to address where I have the greatest resistance and the greatest rejection into the next year. So I've already talked to my therapist about it. And that for me is like I I want to build next year something bigger, something different. I have resistance around doing that in a certain kind of way of like building a business, but we don't need to get into that right now. Where that is relevant for this kind of container exactly is that, like, it goes hand in hand with me, really leaning even further into sharing more of myself. So, the only way I know how to do this right now is to be meta because I have protection up right now. Um, I will tell a story of someone in 2020 who, like, hurt my heart in the best way. We were talking to each other, getting to know each other long distance over the phone, and they read some stuff that I had written online, like old blog posts. And then like it was like our fourth phone call or something. Like we hardly really knew each other. And they were like, "Yeah, you hold back in your writing." And it has fucked me up ever since 2020 when they said that because I was like, "Damn it, I do hold back in my writing." And so what I'm feeling right now is like my intention for this space was always to share updates. But if I'm really being honest about the live weekly updates, then what I would be sharing are the like truest parts of what came up for me this week. Some of you have heard those things, because I talk to you in real life and I'm not putting it on the internet. But right now I have protection up because I'm not sharing the the truest parts of what came up for me this week, and I'm sitting with that self-awareness, understanding that, like, I think that in the next year, I want to move myself into a place where I can even be more open. That's really what I want. It's what I want to do in my writing. I don't want to hold back. It's what I want to do in my sharing. I don't want to hold back because I know that, like, the philosophy that I'm trying to share is more powerful and more meaningful when you actually understand exactly where I'm grappling with it in my own real life. I can give you concepts and definitions, but like for me, this is my everyday, every night. It's what I breathe constantly. And so if I were to actually tell you what I'm really thinking about power, then I would have to like pull you into the most intimate aspects of my like Wednesday last week, you know? And I know that I'm not fully ready to do that, or I'm not constituted in a way to do that. But I'm just naming it because I think that maybe it's helpful to see that, like, sometimes, even if we have really clean and nice definitions of power, um, the practice or the process of like becoming the people we want to be, or like really harnessing our power, stepping into that, it truly is a process. And I want to normalize that it's totally okay. Like, even being in the process is a way to be demonstrating our power. I hope that much is clear through everything that I've shared right now too, that like it's always the conditions of our choices, and those conditions are kind of building in process. That's us doing the work. That's what I was talking about last week with trusting the process, showing up for it. So I'm just trying to be honest and say, I really wish I was in a place right now to share more about the wildly profound and beautiful and rich 7 days that I just had. It's like unfathomable. And I'm at capacity because of it. I've spent the past 2 days like recovering as much as I could because it was just so much. And I'm already a person who's too full. So um, I wanted to share that, and I didn't on this live update, because I don't know, I'm getting there. I maybe I'm hopefully getting there. Anyway, I'm so excited for everything that has happened this year. I'm so grateful for it and everybody who has shown up for it. Um, I'm sitting right now personally with these reflections on power and really trying to like do a deep analysis and survey of like where my power is, so that I can continue to move into the next months and the year ahead with that like energy. And I invite you to do the same. Maybe we can see all the ways that we actually have power and have been using it and creating something from it with each other in very responsible ways that maximize our opportunities for freedom and choice, and to design and build lives and communities that we want, and relationships that support that with one another. I think all of that is so incredible, and it's possible, and we're doing it. So let's keep doing it, you know? Okay. That's gonna be the end. There's there's so much I did not say. I'm just gonna have to swallow that. Sorry. You don't get it right now. Maybe eventually all that stuff will come out in a different form at a different time. I'm sure that's true. I'm confident that'll be the case. Anyway, if you want to see the page that I wrote on power, you can check that in the chat of my Substack space, Want to Know. And if you want to learn more about me or whatever's going on, go to CoriWong.com. I need to work on this part too. Okay. Love you all. Thank you so much. And I'll probably be back here next week. We'll talk about maybe what happened in the 7 days from now until then. See you.